team that they didn't think twice about it, and he was kind of an odd figure at that time. So they just kind of shrugged it off. But so then we get past the Super Bowl. Now we're, scouting combine. No Mike Robbie. Draft. No Mike Robbie. I mean, this has been months. The general manager of the Miami Dolphins has been missing for like 5 months, and no one has written about it.
Welcome back to the Fish Tank, presented by Van Horn Law Group and Casabella Design Group. Seth Levit and the toughest podcaster Dan Marino ever played with. He is OJ McDuffie. Juice, got a different one today, but I think it's going to be a really fun one.
Man, it's going to be so much fun, Big Seth. We always talk to these athletes that played the game or did some things like that, but people really never know some of the things that go on behind the scenes. Behind the scenes, athletes, they keep it close to the vest. They don't tell us a lot of stuff, man. But when you can hear some things that are from behind the scenes, like, before we got on, we talked a little bit about Harvey Green, and talk about that. We've always talked about that duck on the water, I mean, where he's like looking all smooth and stuff, but underneath all those little legs are, we're going to have some fun with this one because we're going to learn some things that even I, not being a Dolphin fan back in the day, I'm going to learn a lot today. That's for sure.
Well, I love that you mentioned Harvey Green, and I love a good PR person's story. But before there was Harvey Green, before there was Ann Nolan, who's doing a great job there now, before there was Eddie White, who we need to get on the show at some point, there was this guy, and it's Chip Namias. If the name Chip Namias doesn't jump out to you, it means that you just weren't following PR people for the Miami Dolphins back in the early 80s. So think Killer Bees, think both Dolphins Super Bowls in the 80s, think Dan Marino, all of this stuff. Chip, we are pumped up. Even though you might get a fine here for, your arrival time, we are very excited to have you in the Fish Tank.
Good to see you guys.
Yeah, it's going to be great. And I love that you were just saying, what a tight-knit group the Miami Dolphins are. The last time you and OJ McDuffie were together, you sat at the same table at the grand opening for Kim Bokamper's Catch and Cut restaurant. So, I mean, it's talk about a family.
Absolutely. The aqua and orange is strong.
That's
yes,
right.
It is.
That's right.
Yes, it is.
And he did say aqua and orange. Yes, I get it, Juice. I get it.
He got
it right. I like
to
put orange before aqua at times. And Juice
we can talk about that, Chip, because this dude, I think it's the orange, because you always think about the Florida orange, Big Seth. You know what I mean? The Gator orange.
Well, my Gators had
think
orange.
About the rest.
My Piper Bengals had orange. My Bare Middle Bears had orange. Orange runs deep.
Stuck on orange first, man. We got to get off of that.
Absolutely.
Too good. Too good. Juice, you could kick it off.
Oh, damn. Sorry.
I was like, I waited. I was like, shit, I don't think he's going to read it damn.
No, I got you. I'm sorry. That's on me, Chip. That's on me. So, Chip, if I think about your tenure as the Dolphins PR man and that window of 82 to 86, I honestly, I'm drawn to the 84 season because that's when Dan the man, reinvented offensive football. Now, I didn't get to Miami until 93, and traveling with Danny was like, man, showing up with, he was a rock star, be honest with you. But I cannot imagine what it was like for, when, his fresh face came and the hottest name in all of sports doing something that the NFL had never seen. What do you remember from those days, and what kind of impact Danny's success specifically, and that's a tough word for me, specifically, and the overall team success have on your job? What did it do for you and your job?
Well, when we first drafted Dan, we were coming off a Super Bowl with David Woodley as the quarterback. So Dan's first year, he had no impact. He wasn't playing, and hard to believe now, but no one ever from the media ever talked to him. I distinctly remember 2 different times where I went up to a couple of the beat writers during the practice week and said, would you guys just go in and, even if you're not going to use it, talk to Dan Marino, because no one ever talks to him. He's a first-round pick, and I feel sorry for him because nobody ever talks to him. And, that hard to believe that actually happened, but it did. But, then the famous first game when Dan started his first game, when Shula finally decided to make the move, it was a home game against Buffalo. And the reason I remember that game, we lost the game 38-35, I believe was the score, but Danny played great. But that game was also a game where Dave Shula, who was the receivers coach, his wife went into labor a few hours before the game, and Dave had to make a decision. This is now back in the 80s, not like things are now. And Dave decided he would leave his wife, Leslie, to have the baby by herself, and he would coach the game, which he did. And of course, the rest is history. But, then the phenomenon of Danny in '84, it just became crazy back in the days when newspapers had national writers and they would send them on the road to cover the hot story in the league. And we were overwhelmed with the request for Dan. When he hit,
Nice.
he hit big. And we had, 20, 30 national writers coming in every week. And back at the old Dolphin facility, which, as we know, was a dump over at Biscayne College, then later St. Thomas, we had a bare bones locker room and there was a pool. And Danny would do his national interviews in a group by the pool. So it looked a lot better than it really was, but yeah, he just exploded. And then that season was a whirlwind. It was a great trip to go on.
Whose choice was it to do the interviews by the pool? Was that you, Chip, saying, "Hey, let's make it look like South Florida is this glamorous place"?
Well, you didn't want to do it in the locker room because that was a dump, and the locker room butted out onto a gravel parking lot. You don't want to do it there. So, and our weight room, as people may not know, the Dolphins back then didn't even have an indoor weight room. It was a couple of barbells outside by the pool, and that was it.
Yeah.
So the pool was really the only option.
I've heard about that quote unquote weight room. I love when guys who were like hardcore lifters, like Louis Oliver's story, the first time he went there was hilarious. And the weights apparently from being outdoors and being by the pool were all rusted. And they won a bunch of games. Guys won a bunch of games. Man, there's so much that I could ask you right now. And I want to ask you, but let's take a breath for a moment and discuss how you landed the job as the head of publicity for the Miami Dolphins. So I know you were with the Strikers first. Was Thomas Rongen with the Strikers when you were there?
Yes,
was that the Thomas Rongen era?
So I lived a couple of blocks from me.
That's crazy. It's crazy to me that he coached at like South Plantation High School and all that, and they made movies about him going over to, it's just, the whole thing is wild. And so, again, all roads leading to Harvey Green. Harvey's story of how he became the Dolphins PR director is this epic battle between George Steinbrenner and Joe Robbie. And, and of course with Harvey, it's just this dramatic thing. What was that process like for you?
I had gone to the University of Florida and I had worked in the old North American Soccer League, which some of your older viewers and listeners may remember. And I was on my third team. I'd worked for the Memphis Rogues and the Tulsa Roughnecks. And I've been hired as the PR director for the Strikers, who were owned by the Robbie family. And the Dolphins at that time had a PR director named Dick Horning. And they also had a director of publicity named Charlie Callahan, who was an older guy, probably in his 70s at the time, who'd been a legend as a PR guy at Notre Dame. And he was an old friend of Joe Robbie's. And Charlie was the PR director for Coach Shula and the team out at the practice facility. Dick Horning only stayed at the downtown office and was the head PR guy, but he handled administration stuff downtown while Charlie was at camp every day. So Charlie was getting a little bit long in the tooth. And so with Joe Robbie being, let's say, a little on the frugal side to save some money, they had me go down and work with Charlie Callahan and kind of break me in as the PR guy at camp with the older Charlie. And so I was doing that while still being the PR director for the Strikers. It was the soccer off season at the time.
So the Robbies owned the Strikers, is that right?
Yes, they did.
Okay,
yes.
Got it.
They did. So I was down there working with Charlie Callahan and learning the ropes. And about 3 or 4 days after I'd started, the 1982 players' strike was called. Yeah. And so everything stopped for several weeks. And there were no replacement players that year. There were just no games. It was a 9-game season. I believe the Dolphins went 7-2 that year. And so when we came back from the strike, the very first game was the Dolphins playing a Monday night game against the Buccaneers in Tampa. And that was a whole story unto itself. But to answer your question, I worked the rest of that season, and the Dolphins ended up going to the Super Bowl. And things went pretty well.
Don't skip through it. I want to hear that story. So you were how old? How old when you are essentially being groomed to become the head PR guy?
25.
So you're 25. I mean, you're a friggin' kid. I was, let's see, what time? 96. I was 23 when I was an intern. You're 25. You're the head PR guy.
Right.
Don Shula is your head coach. They hadn't even drafted Marino yet. So that in itself is crazy. But you were telling me some of that story of your first experience being a PR person. You got to share it because Juice is going to love it.
I had essentially never really been to an NFL game. I had barely met the players. I had only really worked there for 5 days, 3 days pre-strike, and then 6 days, 3 days leading up to the first game after the strike ended. And so they told me I'm traveling. Now I'm just working with Charlie Callahan. I'm not the guy yet. I'm just the Strikers PR guy on loan to the Dolphins. They tell me you're going on the plane with the team to Tampa. And I'm going, okay. So I'm on the plane and somebody comes over and sits next to me on the plane and says, oh, tomorrow morning you need to go to the Bay Harbor Inn in Tampa and represent the Dolphins at the network production meeting with the ABC Monday Night crew, which then was Howard Cosell, Frank Gifford, and Don Meredith, famous producer and director Chet Forty and Bob Goodrich. And I'm like, what is a production meeting? I didn't even know what that was.
I love it.
Some of your listeners and viewers may not know that's when all the network people meet with the PR guy and you give them information about the team and it gives them anecdotes and info for the broadcast. So I don't even know what I'm going to be doing at this meeting. And so they said, oh, it's nothing. Just check with the trainer and get an injury update and come up with some anecdotes. I'm like, anecdotes? I've never even seen this team play. I've only met Coach Shula one time. I don't know any anecdotes. So I got index cards and I went through the media guide and it was so amateurish. I'm writing down notes on index cards and, like it's going to be bad. So I walk into the room and it's this long table with like 40 people in there, including Cosell wearing sunglasses with a 3-foot unlit cigar in his mouth.
Oh, it's so good.
Gifford and Don Meredith. And I'm a kid. I know nothing and I'm intimidated. And there was this big spread of food, immaculate, untouched. And I later found out that the entire crew was told no one can touch the food until the Dolphin PR director has finished his spiel. So now nobody even wants me to be there because they just want to eat.
They just want to eat.
So I'm going through my index cards and I'm saying just like obvious things that I don't even know, it's embarrassing.
Shula's from Ohio,
And I'm flop sweating like Albert Brooks in broadcast news. It's just dripping. And, and I think I got to, I give the injury update and then I think I'm saying, oh, and we have the Blackwood brothers, Glenn and Lyle, and they're brothers and and like suddenly there was this booming voice and I don't do a good Howard Cosell, but he just goes, young man, nobody here cares about the Blackwood brothers. Move it along. And I'm like, so I just skip to the last card and say something real quick. And I go, that's all I've got. As soon as I said, that's all I've got, it had been a totally quiet, pristine atmosphere. I was the only one talking. When I said, that's all I got, suddenly 40 people leaped out of their chairs and made a beeline for the food. And I was there to pathetically pack up my belongings and blink out of the room. And I'm packing up my briefcase and I'm getting up to go up and no one is even noticing me. I'm like a footnote that I was ever even there. And as I get up to leave, this arm drapes around me and I look up and it was a very tall Howard Cosell. And he put his arm around me. He says, you're a Jewish kid, aren't you? And I said, yes, sir, Mr. Cosell. And he said, that's what I thought, a Jewish kid. Here's my private number. Anyone gives you a hard time, you call me. And
how about that?
You're going to do great. A Jewish kid, you're going to do great. And I slink out of the room, and that was my introduction to the NFL.
Oh, my God, Big Sam.
And then at the end of that season, they moved me and made me the director of publicity, PR for the Dolphins. And that's how I got the job.
Oh my God, that's way too good.
Incredible.
That's way too good, man. It's so much in that right there, Big Seth, to even talk about, man. I mean, obviously, you're taking over the job in '82, and then there was a strike season as well. You talked a little bit about the Killer Bees, man, and that defense. There was also the Woodstock, the two-headed monster at quarterback at that point, and and you said it. The Dolphins ended up going to the Super Bowl 17 at that point. That is your first season in the NFL. I mean, what the hell? What a hell of a ride that was right there, Chip. Man, that's crazy.
I remember when we got off the bus at the Super Bowl, and it was at the Rose Bowl, and I saw the big Rose Bowl stadium with the sign. I went over and had my picture taken in front of the Rose Bowl because at that time I go, I may never I may not only ever be back here, I may never be working another NFL game after this. So I got to have something to prove that I was here.
We've had AJ Due in, and we were going to talk a little bit about AJ, man, one of the all-time characters, obviously, in Dolphins history.
I got a story on that.
I guess he had a bit. He caused a bit of a stir after appearing on the Bob Hope Super Bowl show. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, we were at the Super Bowl, and AJ, of course, had the 3 interceptions in the AFC Championship game. So during the week before, leading up to the Super Bowl, Bob Hope back then had an annual Super Bowl special on NBC. It was a big deal. And we got a call that they wanted AJ to appear on the Super Bowl special with Bob Hope. There was taping on, I think, Wednesday night before the game. It's amazing that Shula gave permission because they were going to pick AJ up in our hotel, which was in Newport Beach, and drive him to where they were taping in Pasadena, which if you know Southern California, that's probably an hour and a half drive. And Shula must have been sleepwalking at the time I asked him, because he said, okay. So a limousine came to pick us up, and it was me, AJ, and Frances, AJ's wife. And we went to Pasadena, and they brought us right into Bob Hope's dressing room, where Bob Hope was not yet dressed or in makeup. I don't exaggerate when I tell you, without makeup, Bob Hope was unrecognizable. I had no idea that was him. He was, I don't know, he may have been in his 80s at that time. But the classic story was, on the way back, we've got to drive an hour and a half back to Newport Beach, and it's kind of late at night. AJ was hungry, and nothing was really open. But there's a fast food chain people may be familiar with. It's mainly on the West Coast, called Jack in the Box. And they had just engineered the first drive-through window. No other fast food chains. Jack in the Box invented the drive-through window. And so we had never seen it before. It was like, another planet to us. How cool would that be? Yeah. So we go to the Jack in the Box because it's the only thing open. So the limousine pulls around to go to the drive-through window, but it was so long, the limousine, that we couldn't get the right angle to talk into the clown's mouth of the Jack in the Box. So AJ gets out of the car in full tuxedo, and he's never been to a drive-through window. He doesn't know you just talk naturally. He literally, in a tuxedo, puts his head down the clown's mouth of the Jack in the Box drive-through, and it's like as if the clown is in there telling the clown what he wants, which was like 8 hamburgers. And he's got his head in the box. You can't even see his head. You just see a tuxedo body down. And that's our first experience at a drive-through window.
Oh, that's too good. Oh, my God.
Why with AJ is it always a food story, Juice? Like, remember he told the pork chop Parmesan story he told on our show, Parmesan.
Right. You know what's so funny, Chip, too, is like a decade later, I was on Bob Hope's All-American team 10 years later. And you're right. They told us not to touch Bob. Don't get close to Bob because Bob was getting up there in age. So if you saw him he's in his 80s. He had to be in his 90s when I saw him a decade later, bro. So that's crazy.
Wild. Too good. And I love the production meeting story because I told y'all my production meeting. Well, first of all, there's so much, and I know I'm jumping backwards, but the fact that Howard was the guy that kind of, if you weren't nervous to start with, you probably were damn near wet yourself after he spoke up. But then at the end, he's the guy that kind of takes you under his wing, which I thought was really sweet. But, my production meeting experiences, if Harvey if Neil or myself were in that production meeting longer than 3 minutes, Harvey would look at us like, what in the hell are you doing here? He didn't want anybody else in there but him and who was supposed to be there. And he would send Neil and I into the hotel rooms of whoever the next 2 guests were. So I'd be sitting with Zach and Izzo while Neil would be walking down the quarterback and, waiting for the head coach to leave. And he kept us rolling. And the last thing he wanted was us sitting in there, I guess, touching any of that food. So maybe that's what it was. Too funny. So 1982, again, Super Bowl, all that great stuff. But there was another famous or perhaps we should say infamous moment that took place in 1982. And that was the Snowplow Game. And so, Juice, the great thing about when you book a PR guy as your guest, he spoon-fed us all the stories. Like, I didn't have to do any research. Just, Chip, do you have any good stories? And he just sent me a novel of Dolphins history, which is fabulous. But one of the things in our exchange, Chip, that you said was you listed the behind-the-scenes reaction Coach Shula had to the moment where Patriots head coach, and he didn't write all this out, but just for everybody, if you're not familiar with the Snowplow Game, so Ron Meyer was the head coach of the Patriots. The game was an absolute blizzard. The field was truly covered in white. Guys are slipping around. It was forget low scoring. It was a 0-0 game. But then Ron Meyer sends out this guy, Mark Henderson, who's on the snowplow on the sidelines, who apparently was like out on parole or something. I don't know. But he goes out there and he clears off a spot on the field as New England, John Smith was the name of the kicker, and he attempts a 33-yard kick. Because he had the one clear spot in the entire field, he makes the kick. It's the only score of the entire game. The Dolphins, who are a Super Bowl caliber team, lose to the Patriots 3-0 in that game. So there's nothing we love better here in the tank than a pissed off Don Shula story. You got to tell us what was going on behind the scenes there.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's not really that long a story, but I'm down on the field towards the end of the game and, walk with coach into the locker room, and there's the cooling off period before the media is allowed to come in. And I couldn't even recount how mad Coach Shula was. I mean, there's the visual cliche steam coming out of someone's ears, which you can't even imagine that could actually, I think there was steam coming out of Coach Shula's ears. He was so angry. His body was almost paralyzed. He didn't even know what to do. He was just so angry because as we know, who know him, if nothing else, Coach Shula was a bastion of fairness. And that was his calling card is fairness and integrity. And to him, that was so objectionable on every level, on everything that he stood for. It was essentially cheating and unfair and not integrity and at its highest level. And what made it even so worse for him was at that point in time, there was nothing that could be done about it. It had happened and there was no reversing it and no fixing it. And he was just so angry. He was inconsolable. And I really worried about when the media came in, what that was going to be like. As I recall, we took an extra 10 or 15 minutes before we let people in, but he was angry. And of course, as the chairman of the competition committee, it ultimately some changes were made and those kinds of things weren't allowed to happen again. But that's certainly an indelible moment in NFL history. As you said, if you don't know the Snowplow Game a moment ago, I think no matter what your age is, everybody knows the Snowplow Game.
Yeah,
if
no question.
Go on YouTube.
Yeah,
That's
right.
It's definitely on YouTube. So I feel like it's one of those things that he carried with him maybe the rest of his life. But I know you could not. I would hear stories about like Ron Meyer was a dead man to him after that. He
never mentioned his name again. Never said the words Ron Meyer. I did hear just recently, within the last few months, and I actually asked Dave Shula if it was true, that Ron Meyer traveled in and went to Don Shula's memorial. I don't know if that's true or not.
Oh, wow. Wow, that would be interesting to find out. It's everything that you said. That's all we've ever heard, that, as tough as he was, that it was all about fairness. There's a famous story where somebody had found I don't know if it was the Raiders playbook or what have you, and he didn't want any part of it. So the idea that would happen to him, against him, and against his team, I can't even imagine. And so you were like literally by his side as he's just boiling over in
the coach's locker room, just me and him. He was in the head coach's private locker room at Schaefer Stadium, and very angry.
Very angry. Yeah. I mean, you mentioned it, man. Coaches, I love Coach. And, just as a great man. And, you talk about some of the relationships, you talk about that situation right there. We always knew that he was always tough, but he was always fair. But I know he had to have, and we know this when I played, that he had some serious, I don't know if it was issues, Big Seth, but always had some different situations with the media. You know what I mean? And I know that, his wrath had to extend way past just the players at times, especially because I caught him in the 90s. I heard the 70s players had it rough. 80s players had it a little less rough.
Him at the right time,
I had it less than that. But it had to, to the media and the press as well, man. But I imagine you had to deal with some of the stuff that people actually didn't see, Chip. I mean, what is this story about the Dolphins press trailer and Coach Shula's concerns, not only with the media, but with visiting PR guys as well. Tell us about that.
Well, back in the era we're talking about in the 80s, and when the Dolphins had this crummy practice facility at Biscayne College, there was a press trailer. We talked earlier, the facilities were bare bone. So there was no place for the media to go. So there was actually a trailer on the practice field. And that's where the home media covered the Dolphins every day. They worked out of this mobile trailer that had a bathroom in it on the actual practice field.
Was there AC in there?
You could see in there. You could
no,
see
but was there air conditioning? Was there air conditioning?
Yes, there was air conditioning.
Okay, because I'm like,
there was air conditioning.
Yeah.
But so every week that we were playing a home game, the visiting PR guy would come on Wednesday, and Shula was okay with the home writers who were covering the team regularly being able to watch practice. We had established rules of what they could and couldn't report. But when the visiting PR guy came, he was going to come into the trailer and meet with the media. So every week when that happened, Shula had me get a roll of aluminum foil, and I would have to roll out the aluminum foil and tape the foil on all of the windows in the trailer. So there was no way that the visiting PR guy could see anything going on at practice, as if PR guys knew formations or knew anything about football.
Oh,
but
that's so good.
He was always worried, came from the old George Allen old school of you don't want anybody seeing your business. So we kept a couple rolls of aluminum foil in the trailer. And on Wednesdays of home games, I would break it out and tape aluminum foil on all the windows.
Oh, that's too good.
I
love it, man.
It's fabulous. And especially, so like, I don't even know if advancing exists anymore. And I felt like when I was working for the team, it was starting to phase out. But Harvey would always send me on an advance. And half the places I would go, they would go, why does Harvey send you out here? Like, nobody does this anymore. And I would carry around this big suitcase that had like photographs. And they're like, Seth, people FedEx that stuff. Now, email hadn't gotten to what it is now, but they're like, people, you can FedEx that stuff. You can send it via UPS. Like, we can just overnight it. You don't have to spend and send somebody. And I would go out on Tuesday nights, just like Chip is saying, Wednesday, and he would make me visit the facility, and I'd walk in there, and none of the reporters gave a shit that I was there. So it was just funny to me to hear like an advancing story. And then there's the only thing worse than having to advance for me would be walking in somewhere that you're unwelcome. So that's
and you know what, Big Seth, I remember all the time we get off the plane back then where there'd be photocopies of all the articles from the week. Like everything that was said, like there was like a packet of like every single article that was written and everything
we would
that
have
was
to do that.
Yeah, I remember that. I remember that.
We would have to do that.
Hard as it is to believe, back then, when the coaches, like you just said, OJ, when they would get off the plane on the tarmac, I would hand them a stapled set of all the clips since I had been in town since Tuesday. And that's the first time they laid eyes on those articles.
Right.
It sounds like we're talking about the days of George Washington. There was no other way to see those articles. And you would cut them out of the paper all during the week while you were there. And then on Saturday morning before the team came, you go down to the hotel sales office, wherever you were staying with the team, and make copies and make all sets and staple them. And I mean, it's like we're talking about the dark ages.
Right. Well, and Harvey carried that out. So I started in 96 and I was there for 8 years. So Harvey, we had to do that. And towards the end of my run there, like I would send stuff back. It got harder and harder to get papers. You would go to some cities where there weren't papers, or they would have one paper, but Harvey always wanted this kind of obscure paper because there might be an article there that could give an edge to Jimmy. And so I would go drive around at 6 a.m. trying to find these random, I don't know where the News Herald is, man. I don't like, where do you want me to go? Akron Beacon Journal, Harvey, like I'm not driving to Akron right now. And then I'd do that. And then I'd have to cut them up. And at that point he wanted us to fax them back. And one day Neil finally was like, Harvey, do you realize that I've read everything before Seth even sends it back because I go on the internet? Not everything's in the internet, Oh, God.
We didn't have the internet back then, but I'm going to jump in with a quick newspaper story when you're talking about looking at newspapers.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to say this player's name, but this is one of my all-time favorite stories back before the internet, when everybody had to read the newspaper. When we were in training camp, and in our training camp, we were one of the few teams back then that didn't go anywhere, because we were maybe the only team that, because Biscayne College had a dorm, we stayed in the dorm during training camp. So there was a one Miami Herald newspaper rack by the dorm. And during training camp, when the players were sleeping there, they would all buy a paper out of the rack. And it became common knowledge that for whatever reason, back when the paper was either a dime or a quarter, the Miami Herald rack, if you put 3 pennies in the rack, it would open and you could get a paper. And we never figured out why they didn't fix it, because every day when they come to put the papers in and take the money out, it would just be a bunch of pennies.
Right.
And the players are all cheap, so they're all spending the 3 pennies. None of them are spending a dime or a quarter. So it was the Sunday after a preseason game, and the newspaper rack was by the player dorm in a breezeway. And I'm standing there with about 4 or 5 reporters, and a player who I won't name comes up to the pack of me and the 4 or 5 other reporters and said, "Hey man, does anybody have 3 pennies? I want to get a Herald." And so the writers just kind of stood there and didn't do anything. So I reached into my pocket and pulled out whatever change I had without looking at it and held it out. And it happened to be 4 pennies that were in my pocket that I held out. And the guy looks in my hand at the 4 pennies. He goes, "No, it only works with 3." And he walks away. That really happened.
I was going to try and guess the player, but after that, it only works with 3.
He was a high draft choice.
Oh, boy.
I love it. That is
from a Texas school. That's all.
Okay, all right.
We'll Google that for sure.
We're gonna do the math.
What if going bankrupt was the best thing that happened to you? Whether it's your wages being garnished, car repossessed, house foreclosed, or you're suffocating with debt, a good bankruptcy attorney can give you peace of mind that you need and deserve. My name is Chad Van Horn from Van Horn Law Group, and I've personally seen people thrive after filing for bankruptcy. The shame of bankruptcy is just a ploy to keep you in debt forever. There is no shame to work with Van Horn Law Group to get rid of your debt for good. If you're ready to get your life back, call us today. Se habla español.
So now we're in my wheelhouse. We're talking about advancing and production meetings, and we're talking about, newspapers, although I never had the 3 penny deal. And we've covered 1982. We've covered 1984. But also in this list of great story ideas, what caught my attention were the words 1983 Media Guide gaffe. And Chip, now full disclosure, I'm a Media Guide geek. Back in the day when I was a kid, you subscribed to Dolphin Digest, not just because they had great stories, but one of my favorite moments of the year was you would get the Miami Dolphins Media Guide. If you were a subscriber to Dolphin Digest, Andy Cohen had worked out whatever deal with you guys, and you would get a Media Guide sent to you. I remember being at the University of Florida, and I couldn't wait to that day. And I had the library, or the encyclopedia of the Miami Dolphins in my hands. It was just awesome stuff. So you've got my full attention in this, and I want to know what turned the Dolphins Media Guide into national news. But I'm such a geek that I have a copy of a 1983 Miami Dolphins Media Guide here.
Yeah,
I think I have the corrected one, though.
You have the corrected one.
You got to tell us. I got to hear about this.
Yeah, that's really partly how I ended up getting the job. So I'm back at the Strikers. The 82 season is over. I'm back as the PR director of the Strikers. And the Miami Dolphin Media Guide comes out the following summer, whatever it was. And back then, the first time anybody knew there was a problem, there was a tradition of putting the previous year's MVP on the cover of the following year's Media Guide. And the MVP that previous year had been Audra Franklin. So he should have been on the Media Guide cover, number 37. When the Media Guide came out, the person on the cover was a guy who at that time was the 3rd string fullback, Woody Bennett. And the head of PR at the time was a guy named Dick Horning, who was an older gentleman who once wore the same suit jacket 37 days in a row. And he was not really qualified for the job, but he was a old drinking buddy of Joe Robbie's, so he had the job. So he was in charge of the Media Guide, and it came out with Woody Bennett on the cover. And then some of the beat writers started looking at it, and it pretty soon became apparent that that was the least of the problems. By my memory, the Herald came out with a story that there were 373 errors in the media guide, including things like a player who had died the previous offseason named Larry Gordon. His bio was still in the media guide like he was an active player. There were just reams and reams and reams of huge, not typos, huge mistakes. There was a player who was said to be dead who was still alive. There were all sorts of mistakes. And so then USA Today picked up on it and did a whole story with all the mistakes in the Dolphins media guide. Well, Joe Robbie went crazy and he recalled the media guide. And back then you would send, every team in the league would tell you how many media guides they wanted you to send them so they could give them out to all of their media. So
Absolutely.
the Dolphins sent out a memo to all the teams asking to recall the media guide and have them all sent back.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, I get a phone call at the Strikers telling me I need to come down and I have 5 days to rewrite the Dolphins entire media guide.
You're lucky it wasn't the Harvey Green media guide that was 700 pages at the time.
And so I don't even really know the players, but I had to go down there and literally was working 20 hours a day. Back then, nothing was computerized or digitized. You were doing it, on typewriters and whiting things out, and the typeface people with the printers were, running out, reams of copy to paste into a mock-up media guide, and it was a nightmare. And a couple of PR guys from the NFL who I later became friends with told me that they secretly held back a couple of copies of that media guide because they were counting on it being a collector's edition, many years from now and making a bunch of money off of it. So yes, that is the revised version of the media guide. And that whole media guide fiasco is how I ended up really getting the full-time job.
It says revised right there. I didn't look at
okay.
1983 media guide revised. It actually says it right there on the cover. The Dolphins' 1982 most valuable player, Andre Franklin. So, and in memoriam, there's a nice tribute to Larry Gordon there. So great job by you, Chip. So when you sent this, I did a Google search and I found there's somebody selling one for like $140 on eBay. And
the original?
The original.
With Woody Bennett on the cover?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, so you might want to, it might be worth trying to track that down, or maybe you're just pissed off that somebody didn't send it back. And, I remember as you're saying this, and I'm sorry, Juice, I just get geeked up about the damn media guides. And I don't know that they did this when you were the PR, publicity director, but we would get these boxes from the league, and you'd get the red box and the blue box and the AFC and the NFC. And then you would get shipments in. Oh, the Rams were always last because of Georgia. But you would get, the Jets book came in. You would look through and compare and see the people who were there and all the things. And it was like exciting to get all those books. And then you'd go put a set downstairs for the media. Very funny. Very funny. All right, Juice, I'm done.
Yeah, no, man. Look, this is what we were talking about, Big Seth. I mean, hell, I said we talk about players. This stuff right here, people don't ever hear stuff like this. This is compelling stuff, and it's so interesting because like we talked about, as a player, I don't know all this shit's going on. You know what I mean? But then you guys, all the stuff you guys go through that we don't get to witness. All we do is go out there and quote unquote play ball, man. It's just pretty badass, man. So that's really fun stuff, man. So Chip, we've talked about Marino and Shula, a little bit about the Killer Bees, but we cannot discuss we talked a little bit about the Robbies, and I love the Robbies. Seth, they're near and dear to my heart because that's the family that drafted me into the NFL. Sure.
Start getting your first paychecks. I love the Robbie family. Absolutely. That was unbelievable. And the whole family, everybody was just great to me. And I think it's pretty cool that you had the relationship, Chip, with the Robbies beforehand and, from there. But I also know that the people that cover the Robbies, there are a lot of people that cover the Robbies, but there was no bigger name than Edwin Pope, the legendary Miami Herald columnist. From what we understand, the relationship between Edwin and Mr. Robbie was very interesting, to say the least. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, back then, for those younger folks, Edwin Pope was probably the most powerful columnist in the state and one of the most powerful sports columnists in the country. There's an extended Mount Rushmore of famous sports columnists from that era and around the country, and Edwin is certainly on it. And he and Joe Robbie had a bit of a conflicting relationship or confrontational relationship, and they didn't get along that great. And Edwin took an opportunity to take shots at Joe whenever the opportunity arose. Edwin was a big believer that the reason the Dolphins were successful was because of Don Shula and in spite, to some extent, of Joe Robbie. And when the Dolphins first were building their stadium, which was unique at that time because it was one of the first really privately funded stadiums ever built, and they were discussing of what they should name the stadium. And Edwin wrote a column that he thought, and this is when Joe Robbie was alive and well, and Edwin's suggestion was Joe Robbie Memorial Stadium, and the sooner the better.
Oh,
and his other classic line was, after Joe passed away, not long after Joe passed away, I think Edwin in one of his notes columns wrote something like, I wanted to go spit on Joe Robbie's grave, but I hate standing in long lines.
Oh, wow.
I didn't know. Like, why did Edwin hate him so bad?
Wow.
Joe was a
That's
tough.
extreme.
I'm not a big Joe fan myself. I'm very appreciative because without him, I wouldn't have had the career I had. But he was a difficult guy to deal with on every level. Whereas
That's
his son Tim, who was my direct boss at the Strikers, is a wonderful, wonderful guy who I'm still friendly with this day and think the world of.
Well,
and we had another Robbie at the time when I was there. Mike Robbie was.
I want to ask you about that. Yeah. Well, I want to ask you about Mike in a second, but just thinking about the fact that now at the stadium, formerly known as Joe Robbie Stadium, if you go into the press box, it's the Edwin Pope Memorial Press Box.
That wouldn't have happened if Joe was still alive.
No, but I mean, think about that. The Joe Robbie name is gone from that
never
stadium.
thought of it like that. You're
Edwin
right.
Pope's it. So all those things you're telling me about, Edwin kind of won. At least the name of that stadium, that's messed up. That's actually kind of messed up.
I never thought of it, but you're
to
right.
Joe Robbie's credit, and I got Joe Robbie's. Think about that. Yeah, think about that, Chip. And to Joe Robbie's credit, and I have to, I got to get Eddie White in here, if nothing, not only for great stories, but I want to save the story, but I may have had an interview with Joe Robbie as a ninth grader at Piper High School working for the Piper Pipeline, or I might have had an interview for Eddie White doing a very good Joe Robbie impersonation. I need to get that found out. But the point that I'm making is, for all the tough stories you've heard about him, that stadium exists because he went against the grain and
Absolutely.
did something that just had never been done.
Correct. Can't take that away from him.
So,
yes.
but maybe they did. They kind of did because his name's not on it, and Edwin's is. So that's kind of crazy. Anyway, you mentioned Mike Robbie. So Joe, it was a family-owned business. Mike Robbie was one of Joe's sons, and Mike Robbie at one point had the title of general manager, which, from what I understand, and you can certainly verify, it wasn't what we think of a general manager does today, overseeing scouts, drafting players, really constructing the football team. It was more of the business operations, I believe, of the organization. Again, you can clarify those things, but he had a reputation of being one of the more, let's use the word, eccentric characters throughout the National Football League. And then sometime around Super Bowl 19, there's this story of Mike Robbie, and the word that was used is that he disappeared. Chip, you got to tell us what's going on there.
In the context of imagining this happening in today's world, your head would explode. The world would explode. Yes, that's true. Mike Robbie, and he wasn't a general manager in the traditional sense, although other teams had traditional general managers, because, to be frank, he wasn't really qualified for the job. He was a general manager because his father owned the team. And Mike, if you don't know what he looked like, he was very tall, very thin. He kind of looked, the politically incorrect way that he was described at that time was, he looked like Abraham Lincoln with AIDS.
Oh, that is pretty politically incorrect.
So, very politically incorrect, but he kind of looked like a very
but
thin,
I can picture him now.
very thin Abraham Lincoln with the beard. And he always wore an ill-fitting dark suit, and he always had a lot of dandruff on his lapels. Oh. And I think Edwin Pope had the line that he always looked like somebody who had just come back from trying to smuggle cocaine in from South America on his lapels.
Edwin and the Robbies. Who knew?
Edwin
Holy
was bringing
shit.
it. Well, he didn't give a damn, did he?
Edwin did not give a damn.
We were getting ready to play the 84 AFC Championship game against Pittsburgh. And a few days before the game, Mike wasn't around. He was just missing for a few days. And then came the AFC Championship game, and he wasn't there either. And so now we're getting ready for the Super Bowl, and we're thinking he's going to show up. And, I think I don't remember if there was 1 week or 2 weeks between the AFC Championship game and that Super Bowl, but he's missing the whole couple weeks before the Super Bowl. Now we're at the Super Bowl, and it's Super Bowl week, and still no Mike Robbie. The general manager of the Miami Dolphins has not been seen in weeks, and later heard that Joe had private investigators out looking for him, but to no avail, and he was not at the Super Bowl. And the thing was, nobody wrote about it. It's like, to the local guys covering the team, I think they knew he wasn't around, but they considered him so really not part of the radar screen of what was going on with the team that they didn't think twice about it. And he was kind of an odd figure at that time. So they just kind of shrugged it off. But so then we get past the Super Bowl. Now we're, scouting combine. No Mike Robbie. Draft. No Mike Robbie. I mean, this has been months. The general manager of the Miami Dolphins has been missing for like 5 months, and no one has written about it. It's unbelievable, really. Wow. And then the ending of it is equally unbelievable. Mike's secretary was a woman named Joan Butel, whose husband was a marketing guy for the Dolphins, Frank. And
then Barry Butel. Wow, Joan. I know Joan.
People were calling for Mike during these months, and they'd say, Mike Robbie, please. I'm sorry he's not here. Do you know when he'll be back? Not really.
I can take a message.
So finally in May, after he had gone missing in December or January, whatever it was, one day the door of the office opens up and Mike Robbie strides in wearing his traditional ill-fitting black suit.
Like he never left?
What?
He walks in like he never left?
He walks in May, months later, like he never left, just strolls in wearing his suit and his briefcase. And you can't make this up. He stops by his secretary, Joan's desk, and goes, "Any messages?"
Oh, no. He did not. He did not.
Can't make this stuff up.
Oh, my God.
Did Joe? Oh, my God. I wish I knew this story when I worked there and Joan was still there. Because Joan was working with Eddie Jones, right? I think she was Eddie Jones's
very nice woman.
Assistant. Yeah. Oh, my God. Barry Butel listens to the show, so Barry's going to love this. Wow.
Yeah.
Any messages?
Oh, my goodness.
I don't even know where to begin with that. Was Joe Robbie like, hey, make sure this doesn't get out? Was he concerned? No. Were you being told anything? Or it just was kind of a Harvey would say, a wigget. So who gives a shit? It was just like, the sun came up today and Mike Robbie's still not here. I mean, nobody thought twice about it. Nobody wrote about it. Nobody asked about it. Any messages? It's just an empty office down the hallway, and Joan Butel didn't have a lot to do.
Yeah. Chip, and Seth, I think that probably the fact that nobody really thought that he was really about football operations might be like, it's no big deal. He's not around because he's not a part of the draft. He's not a part of free agency. He's not a part of all. There wasn't a lot of free agency back then, obviously. But at the same time, though, damn, how do you disappear as a GM and then nobody gave a damn really? And then he just was he on a vacation, an extended vacation or something? Yeah. Did anybody find out where he was? He's Chip's like, I don't think so. That was a loaded answer right there. He was on an extended something. No doubt.
Can you imagine if in today's NFL, an NFL general manager disappeared for the conference championship game, the Super Bowl, the combine, and the draft?
The draft. I don't think that NFL general manager would be an NFL draft. No. But the fact that he comes walking in.
Well, he was the owner's son. So even in today's NFL, he might still be there.
He might be okay.
I guess so.
He might be
I guess
okay.
so.
He might be okay. Hey, Big Seth, man, I mean, we might have to bring Chip back, man, because
We have to.
there's so much stuff, man. Because I mean, these stories are incredible, absolutely incredible, man. And like I said, I love hearing the stuff that I never would have known as a player because of things that go on, behind the scenes. But we do need to wrap things up a little bit, Chip, and but before we do, I need to ask you, how did you transition from the NFL strikers, NFL PR guy, to taking your talents to Hollywood? How'd that happen, man?
Well, after I left the Dolphins, I went to the Houston Oilers as their head of PR for 9 years. And then I went from there to the same job with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And then after I left the Buccaneers, I decided to start my own sports PR firm. And I thought, well, I need to do that in a big market. So I didn't really want to go to New York because I'm a weather wussy. So I thought, well, I'll go to LA. And at the time, I didn't really know anything about the entertainment business. I was just going to start a sports PR firm. And I was lucky enough to be able to lease office space at the NFL's West Coast offices. And then I was dating a woman who was an executive in PR for Paramount. And I found out that there was a niche. There was a guy who had basically a one-person niche that whenever Hollywood, a studio would make a sports-themed movie, because the studios have massive PR departments and they have the entertainment world covered. The studio publicity people don't know anything about sports. They don't have any contacts at sports media outlets. So they would hire an outside consultant to create and execute publicity campaigns for sports media, whenever they would release a sports movie. And there was this one guy who had a monopoly on doing it. And I thought, I could do that.
Right.
Yeah. How do I get to be that guy?
Right.
What's that?
So yeah, how do you get to be that guy?
Right.
So I decided to take him on and try to break into that. And I did. And I have to tell you one real quick thing about that. So this guy he didn't like someone kind of trying to move in on his monopoly.
Sure.
And so it was a very contentious thing. His wife was a big agent in Hollywood. So they tried to run me out and did some very unscrupulous things to run me out. And we had a very contentious relationship, to say the least. About 6 years ago, a reporter at Sports Illustrated named John Wertheim, who's now a correspondent on 60 Minutes, called me and told me, I thought this was a joke. He said, Sports Illustrated every other year does their best of issue, the best of whatever. And they do it every other year. And he said, this year for best sports rivalry, we want to do an article on you and this other guy. I don't want to say his name. And I thought, this is a joke, right? I said, not UCLA, USC, Yankees, Red Sox, Florida, Georgia. Me and this guy, we're best sports rivalry in Sports Illustrated. It wasn't a joke. They did a 6-page article on me and this guy. I refused to pose for a photograph with him, so they had to do an artist rendering of the two of them.
It is a hell of a rivalry if you wouldn't even get the damn picture.
Yeah, I like that.
You're a publicist for crying out loud. You wouldn't get the
If he was,
picture.
I'm not kidding. He did so many unscrupulous things to try to run me out that if I told you about, you wouldn't believe. If he was standing in the road, I would hit him with my car and have no qualms about it.
Back up over him.
Yes.
Chip, I'm going to tell you something. You just became my co-host's favorite guest of all time because he loves having a grudge against something.
Damn right. Damn right.
He still hates the Colts just because they were once in the AFC East. So it's the same thing. God, I love that. Do you have a copy of that article? Because you have to send it to me.
It's funny because when the article came out, they sent me an advance copy. And I had decided to take the high road because I knew the other guy wouldn't.
By not taking a picture with him?
And in my quotes in the article.
Yeah.
And then I regretted taking the high road because he didn't. And it bothered me so much that except the one time I read the article when it came out on an advance copy, because so many people were calling me about it, I've never read it again. And a lot of people told me when they read the article that you took the high road. He looks like a bitter, crappy guy. Yeah. But I still wish I had a platform to let the world know what this guy and his wife had done. I mean, and you guys don't know the story, but I wish I had done it because it was so nasty. But
Wow.
yes, you can
Wow.
Google the article, Sports Illustrated, PR guys with my name, and you'll
Oh,
We'll
we're
see the
going to
whole
Google
article.
it. Oh, it's coming.
I am getting on it, and if I
Yeah,
can't find
we
it, if you're
are
listening to
Googling
this and
that.
you're a Fish Tank
For
fan,
sure.
send it to us if you
For
found it.
sure.
And I know a couple listeners.
It
who
will be
probably
attached
already-
to when we
Oh, it's
when we
not
post
it's
it.
not hard to find.
Yeah,
I
we're
can't
gonna, it's
wait.
gonna
I
be
cannot wait to read that. That is going to be a must for me. And I'm going to follow up with you because I've got this project that's been sitting on a hard drive forever. It's a sports themed scripted podcast. So I need to pick your brain. It probably combines two things that you're an expert in. All right. As Drew said, we do want to get you out of here. You've been incredibly gracious with your time. However, we end every episode of this podcast the same way, Chip. It is the Fish Tank 2-minute drill. I'm sure you saw a million 2-minute drills in all your years in the National Football League, but now you got to buckle up your chin strap and you got to get in one. We've got 2 minutes on the clock. If you need timeouts, let us know. But we're going to throw a few fast-paced, hopefully fast-paced, certainly fun questions at you, and we'll see if we can end this show in the end zone. Sound good?
Okay.
All right, Juice, clock is officially running.
Okay, Chip, here we go. After your run with the Miami Dolphins, you served in similar roles with the Houston Oilers, you mentioned, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, from Don Shula to Jerry Glanville to Jeff Fisher to Sam Weiss and then Tony Dungy. Which head coach was the toughest one to work for? Which was the nicest to deal with? And who was the funniest of the group?
Toughest to deal with was Don Shula, but tough but fair. He had such a great impact on my career. Tough but fair. Nicest, Jack Pardee by a mile.
We left
Funniest, Jerry Glanville, but you didn't want to be the butt of it.
So good. Jerry Glanville's actually in my story, Juice, by the way.
That's right. That's right.
Scarborough plays him. Yeah, he did a great
Oh,
job.
you're wasting my 2 minutes.
Okay, I call it a timeout. All right, Chip, you are a member of a very special group of head PR people in Miami Dolphins history. So if you, Eddie White, Harvey Green, the late, great Jason Jenkins, and let's throw in the current communications chief, Ann Nolan, if all of you sat down at a poker table, I want to know who would go broke first, who would take home all the cash, and who would be bluffing on literally every single hand.
Harvey would go broke first. Eddie White would probably take away all the cash. And what was the other one?
You, Jason. The last thing is that who would we know was bluffing every single play, every
That would
single
also
hand?
be Eddie White.
Eddie White would bluff every hand and take home all the money.
Yes.
I love it. All
All
right,
right, clock's
you're up.
running. All right.
And Eddie White would drive a snowplow over the poker table to find a way to win.
Yeah.
All right, Chip. What is the toughest request Don Shula ever asked of you?
I'm drawing blank, but I'll say this isn't the answer to your question. Before cell phones, he one time called me at home on a Saturday, and when I answered the phone, I said hello, and he went, "Chip, Don," and I went, "Don who?" And he screamed Shula very loudly because he had never called me at home before. No caller ID had been invented, no cell phone. But
Don who?
the toughest, I
would say, Chip, I'd say that damn aluminum foil, man. That's a hell of an ass right there, man.
Every Wednesday.
Okay,
Juice.
I got he asked me to. This is a story. Do I have time or no?
Yes.
Yeah,
Time
we'll
out.
call
We got
time
time.
out.
Yeah,
Tell
you
the
got
story.
plenty of time.
When his son Mike was playing quarterback at Alabama, Don was, very into the results of Mike's games. And back then we used to practice on the day before the game on road games at the visiting team stadium. So we're at Schaefer Stadium in Foxborough practicing, and Alabama is playing Tennessee at that time. And so there's no cell phones. So Don says, go up to the Patriots office which were in the building in the stadium, and get a score of the Alabama-Tennessee game. And so I go up there, and I couldn't get a score. There was no score, and I knew the game was underway. Long story short, there had been a power failure in the press box in Knoxville, and they were not able to transmit the score. Back then, every game wasn't on TV, blah, blah,
Right.
blah. You had to call the AP to get the score. And there was no transmission, so there was no score. Well, Don Shula didn't accept excuses. I
Right.
couldn't go back and tell him there was a power failure. I couldn't get you a score. I'll get a butt
Yeah,
chew.
why didn't you send him a backup generator, Chip? What?
Right. So I decide on my way back to the field that when he asked me what the score was, I'm going to tell him it was 0-0 in the first quarter. Because at some point it had to be
nothing in the first quarter. Oh, it's so good. That is such a great answer. That is too funny. And we'll start the clock here in a second for the last question. But I also love the fact that you had to put up the damn aluminum foil on the windows for visiting PR guys, but he didn't mind sending his PR guy up into the Patriots offices. Right. That's that's too good. All right, clock is going to start back up. Final question. You have seen and experienced so much as a PR guy. Super Bowls, Hall of Fame head coaches, quarterbacks, star players, movie premieres. What is the most impactful or memorable moment of this incredible PR journey you've been on?
Oh, my goodness. Why couldn't you have given me a warning you were going to ask me a question like that?
Because apparently you're a better PR guy than I am.
Can we call
another time out? Call
you
another
got as much time
out.
as you want, Chip.
I got to think about that.
I thought something would, I thought you were at an age where you start to get nostalgic and reflective. There might be a moment that jumps out.
I would definitely say the most impactful moment really for my career, because I wouldn't have had a career without this moment. I graduated from the University of Florida. I was going to go to law school in the fall in Houston after I spent the summer. When I graduated from Florida, I went home to Memphis where my mother was living at the time, and I was just going to get a summer job until law school started in the fall. I had accepted a job working at a department store in Memphis, and I saw a notice in the paper that Memphis had just been granted a franchise, an expansion team in the North American Soccer League. So I had just graduated with a degree in PR from Florida. I had worked for 3 years as a sports writer at the school paper. I had worked as an intern in the sports SID office at Florida. I thought, well, I'd love to do that for the summer. So I called the soccer team office and I said, is there a PR director yet? Because they had just been granted the franchise a week or two before. They said, yes, we just hired. He just started yesterday. I said, well, could I talk to him? So the guy gets on the phone. I said, my name is so-and-so. I just graduated from Florida. I worked at the school paper or sports information office. I said, do you have any summer employment? And he said, do you have a degree in PR, which then was highly unheard of? And I said, yes. He said, well, come down and see me. And so I went down and saw him. I had never seen a soccer game in my life. I went to the library. I checked out some books on soccer. I went and he said, well, I actually don't have a budget for an assistant. So if I hire you for a summer intern, you'll really serve as my assistant PR director. I said, well, that would be great. He says, I can only pay you $2 an hour. Okay. Wow. So I took the job. I called the department store and told him I wasn't going to take the job. But if I didn't call that guy at the soccer team office, he didn't take my call. He didn't tell me to come down to his office and hire me for the summer. Then I take the department store job. I go to law school in the fall, and I never, ever have anything remotely of the 45 or 50-year career I've had. It never happens. So the most impactful moment was that phone call to that soccer PR guy.
Look at that. Absolutely incredible.
That is the 2-minute drill, and that is incredible.
2-minute drill at its finest, Big Seth.
And it says something, not to get all mushy here, but I mean, just the idea that you can live all of these experiences, but sometimes it's a moment like that kind of the spark that set the entire thing off is the thing that stands out the most.
And let's be honest, if I picked the second most impactful moment, it would be Joe Robbie when I was with the Strikers. Yes, it was his frugality to a chance to get somebody at the Dolphins who would be cheap. But regardless of that, if he doesn't move me from the Strikers to the Dolphins, I don't break into the NFL. I go with the Strikers when they move to Minneapolis and then fold a couple of years later, and I'm out of a job, probably working in PR for some bank somewhere. So Joe Robbie moving me to the Dolphins is the second most impactful moment. Absolutely.
Man,
yeah.
So
and, you talk about frugality, but if he was a big spender, he might have just gone and found somebody else, and he might have gone the route that he did with.
That's
maybe
right.
He's like, I'm no more of this bullshit. Let me go get the guy from the Yankees. So
that guy,
he might have done something like that. Chip, this was awesome. I know we worked hard to get it set up. You set us up for success. I apologize that I did not do the same in return, but this was a lot of fun. A lot of fun.
No, I enjoyed it. Enjoyed talking to you guys.
Hey, Chip, thanks for diving in, man.
All right, OJ, good seeing you guys.
Number one, of course, y'all. This ain't no ordinary sports talk. Never been that fish tank.